Now we're good to go. Sorry
Are
for
we?
the confusion, everyone. We're online now, and as Murphy would have it, our technology is it's just being awesome. So with that, Marisa, do your thing and let's get rolling. Sorry, we
Good afternoon, and sorry for the technical difficulties. Welcome to the fourth episode of the COVID-19 Proofing Your Business series, hosted by Coalmarch and PCO Bookkeepers. Over the past few Fridays, we've gone through what business owners are experiencing on the front lines of this pandemic, and we've heard from industry experts on ways to adjust and overcome new challenges as a result of COVID-19. For our final webinar in the series, we're going to be talking about how to not just COVID-proof your company, but how to crisis-proof your business for the long term. I'm Marisa Palmieri, and I'm your moderator. I'd like to introduce once again Donnie Shelton and Dan Gordon.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Donnie is the CEO, or Donnie owns Triangle Pest Control and is the CEO of Coalmarch. Coalmarch is the leading provider of digital marketing and sales efficiency solutions for the pest control and lawn care industries, and they've been helping service businesses to get more leads, close more sales, and grow their companies for over 10 years. Dan Gordon is CPA and Managing Director of PCO Bookkeepers. PCO Bookkeepers is an accounting and bookkeeping firm that has been offering financial management services to the pest control industry for over 20 years. He and his team work with hundreds of the most successful and largest pest control businesses in the US. And with that, I will turn it over to Dan and Donnie to get us started.
All right.
All right.
Let's go to the marketing
Well,
update.
Yeah, I mean, so big picture, Dan, I think today we're going to try to close this series off. I think most folks have adjusted to, I guess, the post, well, it's not post, I'm not going to say COVID-19's over, but I think most folks have gotten into a groove of what the new normal is now that the virus is here. And so today I'm excited to talk about kind of like, hey, here's what's happening since this thing has kicked off. We're going to go through a little bit of marketing, go through a little bit of what's happening on the financial side, and then get into some ideas on, hey, if this thing flares up again, and some things that you can do if, you know, not if, but when the next crisis comes. So with that, I want to dive into a few numbers. You know, one of the things that I like to pay attention to, and I think is a good barometer of what's happening in the industry. We obviously don't have some centralized database to know, you know, for the industry, what specifically is happening in the digital space. All we can do is look at what Google Analytics gives us and kind of what our clients are doing as well. And so when I show this general search volume slide here, what I'm trying to understand and kind of the metric that we're using to see what's really happening on the digital side in our industry is general search terms. And as you can imagine, pest control in the United States, it's a nice key word, you would think for, I mean, obviously we have lawn care folks on this call as well as other industries. But, you know, I think pest control is in, you know, it's classified as essential service. I think most home services are classified as classified as essential services. And so if you look at this, there's some interesting trends here. And the first one is that prior to the virus kind of kicking off, we were ahead, you know, in general on the digital side in terms of search for the term pest control. As this has went on, that has trended lower than last year. Now, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that the virus is causing folks to search less and that consumer behavior is changing. And the reason I say that, and then, you know, we can always disagree because we never do, but I think that this could be, you know, it could be weather related. I mean, it certainly has an impact on it. I think the virus is having an impact on consumer behavior. I just don't believe that that the difference that we're seeing here is significant enough to warrant us saying, well, the virus is causing a shrink in our industry, because, you know, we have, depending on where you're at in the country, there's going to be a different impact. And so with that,
I think one of the things that that you can take away from that is that, you know, if this thing goes on for much longer, it's definitely going to have an impact. The problem is, and we want to remain positive, and we are positive because the data is showing us positive things. But I think that the the big problem is that the rules change every day, right? So if I'm playing baseball every day, 3 strikes and I'm out, 4 balls and I'm on first base. The problem with this thing is I'm up to bat, I got, 1 strike, and they say we just changed it to 2 strikes, and vice versa with the ball 4. And so the biggest problem here is trying to operate in a landscape where the rules keep changing, whether it's marketing, whether it's the government programs, whether it's on the medical side. At first masks were no good. Now, if you're in New Jersey, everybody's got a mask. And so if
By law.
yeah, by law. And so, what is the new normal? And then, as long as our clients are making money or getting money in some fashion, they're going to need pest control, and a lot of people are going to need lawn care. They enjoy green lawns. We know that. But what where does this thing go? And I think some of the data that you're going to show here is pretty telling.
Well, I think it's a good, using pest control, using that term as kind of a data point is good, because I don't know about you guys, but I know there's just a ton of folks that sit at home and just search pest control, right? Because when we look at pest control, that's a very good term to look at, because most folks that are searching for that term are folks that have a problem, right? It's not like, normal consumer behaviors is that, oh, tonight I'm going to learn about pest control, especially if I don't have a problem. So long story short, that's the trend. I wanted to go back to it. Let's move forward. This right here is, as of yesterday, total number of reported cases. You can kind of pick out of this map which states are most affected by the virus, which ones are not. And so a question I had was like, okay, well, that's national search. How are we doing in specific areas of the country? And so if you look at kind of each, Louisiana, obviously a hard hit state, Texas, New York, Maine, and again, we added trend lines to these, and you can kind of see there's not much here in 2020 versus 2019. In Louisiana, one of the hardest hit areas in the country, it was below before, now it's on point. In Maine, it's okay, so that's a crazy trend graph there in Maine. It's because it's a small data set. There's not much there. Again, it's slightly higher. And then in New York, it started out lower and now it's higher. And so what this is telling you is that I don't think that the infection rate is any way correlated to demand. I think this is more weather related. I've been in the northern area, especially like New York, there's been a cold snap. And so,
where's your California graph? I mean, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, the California graph, I actually ended up pulling it, but the interesting thing about what's happening in California is that it's growing.
Because
right?
the weather's good in California,
Yeah,
right? That's exactly what's going on.
Exactly. So there's obviously the impact of folks who have the virus. Now the next thing is okay, what about folks who are losing their job, right? That obviously would have a huge impact on the industry. And going back to kind of this this graph of looking at pest control over the United States year versus year, and then kind of matching that up with what's happening with unemployment. And you can kind of see from this graph, this graph is as of like literally an hour ago. USA Today just dropped this graphic. They got a page story about states most affected with unemployment. As you would imagine, Hawaii is a percentage of, it's a very, their economy is highly driven off tourism. No one's traveling, vacations, they are one of the hardest hit areas. But long story short, this graphic shows you what's happening. What's that? I don't know. Anyway, so
heard something in my
long
ear.
Story short, yeah, I heard something weird on we're just having all kinds of fun with GoToWebinar today. But you can see Rhode Island pretty high, and Michigan really high, and so we kind of said, okay, well, let's take a look at states that have really high unemployment. What's happening with search terms there, and what's happening in digital? So you take a look at Georgia, it's down. And I'm going to go back to this graphic right here. Georgia doesn't actually pull the stat here. We had it in the one before. You look in Virginia, it's actually up. And so overall, again, our industry is showing pretty resilient, even in areas that have high unemployment. Now, the question would be, and Dan, I'm sure you can answer this question, why is it that unemployment's not really having an effect on the industry in those states? Any guesses?
Do I get 1 or 3 guesses?
As many as you need. Yeah,
Well,
I mean, so here we are. We have unemployment, like in some areas where it, the claims are extremely high, or it's a much larger part of the population, but still we don't see much of a change in digital search. So why would
yeah.
you think that would be?
Well, I think that people are at home right now and doing a lot of searching and whatnot, and whether they're buying or
Right.
not. I think you've got a real interesting stat later about the mobile versus desktop, but
Mm-hmm.
this is kind of interesting because Google a Google conversion is different than what you think of a conversion. It's not a a lead that turns into a sale. It's an ad that pops up that somebody acts on, and so that being up 23% shows that people are on the computer and they're doing their thing and they're converting Google the pay-per-click,
Right.
which is kind of
And
interesting.
it is interesting. And I mean, I think probably the saving grace is that when you look at this graphic right now, um, the majority of these claims are happening outside of the demographic of those who typically use pest control. Now, much like what Dan said before, if this goes on longer, this is going to be far reaching, right? If you get rid of the front line, now it's like, what are the middle managers? What are they managing, right? Well, those folks are gone. And so I think if it gets prolonged, we are definitely going to see an impact in our industry, but not yet. We're not seeing it.
So one of the other things, though, is the unemployment, the amount of money that people are receiving on unemployment is higher than
Oh,
it's ever been. Like if you remember what Gene Seawright said, that some people
I
are getting
know,
paid more to stay
I
home
know.
than they were on the job. So, you've got
Yeah,
more
so that
disposable income.
maybe that's a new market, Dan. It's like, hey, go on unemployment and buy pest control. So who knows?
Absolutely.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. So, but yeah, I mean, it is interesting. So going back to this stat here, we, as an industry are actually seeing the opposite. And I think this is great news for all of us. Our conversions, Google considers a conversion. Someone comes to your site, they engage with your site and they do something, whether that be a phone call, click a form, whatever. Year over year, 2019 to 2020, up 23%. This is a staggering number. What this is showing you is that there's a lot of activity. There may be less searches overall, but when you go year over year, people that are searching are taking action. So it's a really good number for our industry. Second thing, and this is just, we have a few hundred clients at Coalmarch, and so we can't go into sales data for the industry. Obviously, we don't have that kind of data. And even within our own client base, there's some who have a lot more data than others. So we just pulled a sampling. You can kind of see these numbers are straight. They're pretty much on par with what you would expect this time of year. Cost per lead sitting around the 50 to 89 mark, and then cost per sale. Obviously, depending on where you're at, depending on how hard you're driving, these numbers are going to flex. But I just show this data because what it's showing is everything for the most part is pretty standard. And then if you take an average of all of our clients, overall cost per lead right at $54, and on the paid side it's at $99, and then Google Ads is at $104. Again, these are pretty standard numbers. This is pest and lawn. Not much is changing here. I think some folks are paying more online than they typically would, and that's what this next slide is showing you. Most of our clients are up 32% in terms of what they're paying versus last year, and over the year to date, which is 45%. Now,
One thing here though is the last 14 days. Remember, you're going into spring,
yep.
right? And so people are. This is the natural. The search starts to go up. So that 32% could be because you're driving traffic up, the weather's getting better. But what's interesting is the second one. This last last 14 days compared to the same period last year is up 45%. That to me is more interesting. Why?
Well,
Who's making the
and this
money?
could
Is it
be,
Google?
well, what we're seeing on our front is that this is a lot of folks who are switching strategies, right? So there's a lot of door-to-door companies that can't get on the door right now. They are going big on digital, right? There's other companies that they're having to swap strategies because things that they could traditionally rely on, they're not there anymore, at least in the short term. And so they're just, you can kind of see the shift happening right now. Now, will this change again as the summer goes on and things start opening up? I would imagine so, but who knows? This is just the data. So, and then Dan, you pulled kind of an out survey. Do you want to talk a little bit about this? With this survey that you did?
NALP did a survey, And basically what they said was in the lawn industry, 42% of companies that they surveyed hit or exceeded the sales targets to date. And we're seeing the same thing with our lawn care companies. And remember, lawn care is different than landscaping. Landscaping encompasses build design, irrigation, maintenance, those kinds of things. And so, but the straight fertilization company, the lawn care company, what we're seeing is that, again, people are sitting at home, they're doing search, they're getting the direct mailers. And so when NALP surveyed its base, 42% of these companies hit or exceeded target to date. So then there were 8% that were lower, 10 to 25% lower, and then 8% which were 25 to 50% lower, and then the 25% less report that less than 25% of clients asking to change contracted services. That's a positive. The two in the middle, I'm going to say that those are build and design. You know, you're probably at this point, if you were going to do $100,000, you know, pool project in your backyard, you're probably putting it on ice for a little while. The maintenance crews, they've got to figure out, because when you're driving a truck with multiple people in it, now they've got to figure out this distancing thing. And so, and they will. That's I've had one of actually several of my clients, one of the peer groups that I run, they're already looking at aeration season, and aeration season happens in the fall, but you drive around in crews. What are you going to do now? Are you going to send 2 or 3 trucks to do one aeration? Where do you get the trucks? That kind of thing. But the straight recurring fertilization business, it seems to be healthy. Let's see what happens if this thing continues on for, you know, months or however long.
So quick funny story, Dan. This last weekend, I had this bright idea that I was going to trench out this area for some driveway timbers, and I hit 3 sprinkler heads along the way, which is just wonderful.
That's what they run. So that's the aeration. That's the plight of the aerator.
Yeah. So I dig this trench out, you know, and I've got my kids out there, and we're just having a great old time. And, you know, I don't know if you ever spent an entire Saturday with backbreaking work and 3 children who are just like, Father, we just love how much work you're giving us. But that's how I spent my Saturday, and I hit 3 irrigation heads. And so Monday morning, I'm like, okay, I got to call an irrigation company. And so I call, and these guys, at least around here, I'm like, okay, we can be out on May 15th. I'm like, excuse me, this is on Monday. And I'm like, you mean April 15th? She goes, no. They were all
They're
like,
doing all their opens. They're getting ready.
I finally got someone that could like jump in super early. I mean, I did get it done this week, and it was, I got worked in. But my point is that, you know, you're right. I think there's pockets where, like, if there's maintenance recurring, that I think those folks are doing just fine. Probably these big, really large projects, and I imagine they're just going to be on ice for a bit until things kind of we get a little bit more certainty. So
absolutely.
Good. So let's talk about what some of this data means and some things that you can do as a result of it. And I think the very top one here is that, you know, hey, keep marketing while it makes sense. I mean, again, looking at these numbers, you know, our industry, you know, there is probably a small impact. I think there's pockets of the country where there are big impacts, but as long as your cost per lead and your cost per sale is in line, I would say stay on the gas and keep going, right? Because the reality of it is that we're getting new clients, we're getting new accounts. You know, we're not through this yet. You know, just because the virus may start coming down, that says nothing about what's going to happen with the economy. We don't know where the bottom is, and so, you know, my key takeaway from this and from looking at the data is like, hey, let's keep going, right? That's the first one. The second one is that I would be very, very in tune with what's going on with my numbers, especially my marketing numbers, right? If you don't know and track your CPS, then I would figure out the infrastructure to be looking at that at almost a daily basis. You know, we're not only fighting what's happening with weather, you know, what typically you would normally do as you ramp up your season, we're also dealing with, hey, if the economy continues to tank, if there's more rounds of layoffs, you want to be able to pivot quickly if things do start turning, because otherwise you're going to be in there competing with everyone else and bidding for words and clicks that are not really going to turn into sales.
Let's just
really
real
important.
quickly go through the formula, because I had a client email me and he said basically that, you know, I'm really worried that my cost per sale is going over $75, or cost per lead is going over $75. And I said, well, you can't even, okay, tell me what your average sale is, tell me what your
Right.
conversion rate is. So why don't you talk to that a little bit, because
Yeah,
$75, I would double that, no problem.
for
Pest
sure.
control companies are selling for multiples of revenue, and
Right. So, I mean, the easiest way to do it, the absolute easiest way to do it is to take, this is what I spent, and by the way, this is Donnie's method, okay? Now, people may say, well, we need to add this, we need to add that. That's perfectly fine. The easiest way to do it, and Donnie's brain, is you take what you spent, everything you spent in marketing, and you divide that by the number of sales that you made. And that's going to give you a rough cost per sale. Now, there's also other ways that you can calculate that, where you look at your cost per lead and then you look at your conversion rate, you marry those two together, and then that gives you your true cost per sale. But I'm gonna say for now, if you don't have this number figured out, take the total spend on marketing. If you wanna add sales, that's fine. I personally don't add sales to it, even though we do pay for it. I strictly look at it from a marketing perspective. I'm sure that probably shocks a
Just
lot of
wait,
folks.
let's go back real quick. So difference between
Yeah,
sales and marketing. Marketing is the money you spend to bring in the lead. Sales are what you pay people to sell the account.
right.
So you're not
Yep.
including the sale.
I'm not,
Sales.
again, that's how, again, it's all in how you calculate it. For me, I look at that, and that number tells me how fast I can go on marketing. So for example, if I'm collecting, let's just say, let's take a scenario where I don't have a whole lot of cash in the coffers. I want to be super conservative. My average revenue per initial, let's just say it's $100, right? Well, I know I can safely drive that number to $100, and I'm not really going to be cash out that month, especially if I'm doing monthly billing or some other, I can keep all my marketing going. I can drive my cost per sale up to $100, and it's essentially going to be, I'm growing based on the money that I'm collecting that month. And so it's almost like a zero cash transaction. Now, going back to what you said, Dan, if I have some money that I want to invest and I'm okay with ponying up some money and I'm going to wait a few months to get it back, I can drive that cost per sale up to $300, right? And it might take me 9 months to recoup that, but it's a lot cheaper than paying 2-3 times, right? If I'm getting average revenue.
Remember, if you're annualized revenue, so you're selling quarterlies, let's say, and if you're getting $75 a quarter, that's $300 a year. If you're selling $125 a quarter, that's $500 a year. And what is the life of that customer? And those are
Right.
things that need to be considered
Yep.
before you can just make a blanket statement that I don't want to pay any more than X.
The main thing is that if you know this number and you have it dialed in, this puts you in a position as a business owner to grow your business based on your terms and do it smart, right? And that way, what's happening with your cash, what's happening with your marketing, and you can pivot extremely quickly. So my key takeaway from this is that you need to know this number. You need to look at it daily. I know we personally look at it daily. I would say at a minimum weekly. And then don't be afraid to pivot if things start turning south, right? Because the last thing you want to do is be late to the game of figuring out that, this is not working anymore, but you just tanked 50 grand figuring that out because you didn't know your cost per sale. So the other takeaway from this, and I didn't talk about this in the stats earlier, but I'm going to talk about it now. As you can imagine, this is from the New York Times. This was just released back in April 7th, where they look at, website traffic. Facebook up 27%. Now, I know no one on this call is spending more time on Facebook because they're home, but most of America is, right? 27% increase, Netflix 16%, YouTube 15%. And YouTube's, their reach before was already crazy. So this 15% number is just crazy. The second thing is, well, to go back to this, hey, if folks are on YouTube, they're on Netflix, and they're on Facebook, this is great branding opportunity, right? Create a video, 15, 30 seconds, target it on Facebook, target it on YouTube, you're gonna get the eyeballs, right? This is showing you that folks, this is where they're at. So I would invest in branding in your topic markets, doing a video, some sort of ad. I would go big with that. The other thing is that, we always talk about how mobile is the future, right? Last year, mobile took over desktop in terms of being the device of choice. Well, that's not the case right now. Everyone being home, this right here is app usage. This is what these graphs, again, this is from the same article of the New York Times, April 7th. Facebook app usage is down, Netflix app usage is down, YouTube is tanked, right? I say it's tanked, it's 4.5%, but remember this is a massive platform. So what this is showing you, and we see this in search as well, is that mobile usually is, the highest growth area. Right now, that's not the case. Right now, it's
That's
all about
so
the
interesting. So interesting, because where are you going to spend your money? Well, you were spending it on mobile, and
right.
now you want to go back and reconsider that and spend it on,
That's
desktop.
exactly right. That's exactly right. So my thing would be, hey, I would be looking at directing my marketing more towards desktop right now in the short term until we can kind of start turning things around. And then the next thing is, this came from an article where Google revealed kind of search behavior and how it's changed since the COVID-19 pandemic has started. And it had some interesting observations. And these were kind of the 5 things. These are not Donnie's things. These came straight from Google, that they kind of found that behavior has changed in these kind of 5 key areas. One is assembling critical information. The second was discovering new connections. You can imagine that folks are not, out and about, and they're not at work. They're not going to kind of social functions, and so they're trying to discover new connections. Obviously adjusting to changing routine. That could be everything from buying dumbbells to, eating from home and using, these meals at home services. Praising everyday heroes, I thought that was pretty interesting. And then the last one is taking care of ourselves and others. And so what does that mean for our industry? Well, I've talked about this in a previous webinar, but I think the key thing to take away from this is it's all about health and safety, right? If I were going to go into a branding campaign on Facebook, I was going to do something on YouTube, if I was going to make some new content on my site, I really would be talking about health and safety, because right now, folks are going to the basics. And I think it was on our second webinar where I showed that graphic about search trends and how what was trending up and what was trending down, and every sector was down except for health and safety. And so this is a key thing just to drive your content and your messaging going forward. And then, the other part is connection. And I say video, video, video. And this is because, YouTube is up, Netflix is up now. I don't know if you can offer commercial on Netflix. I don't think you can, but I know you can on YouTube, and I know you can on Facebook. So I would regularly communicate the status of my business, letting folks know that we're open and that we're keeping them safe and that we take care of their family and their home, making sure that messaging is very, very clear, and making sure that I'm hitting folks where they're at, which right now is watching a lot of YouTube and being on Facebook a lot again. So with that, that's a nice kind of state of the union for marketing. And Dan, I'm sure we're going to get back into this, but with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk about, a little bit of money, what's happening there.
So for those of you who are who received their PPP, congratulations. Most people did not. And the banks are out there telling folks that you're going to have to wait till the second round. We'll see what happens. There was $350 or $349 million appropriated for this, and we ran out of money yesterday morning. I would say that of our clients that we helped who have been communicating with us, probably got a little over 20 million. We've got a bunch of people who are pretty upset. I spoke to my local banker, who's just an absolute fantastic person, and she was out of her mind. She's been working 24/7 getting these applications, and now she's receiving text threats that that these people are going to sue her personally and sue the bank and everything. And so this is going to turn into a bit of a crap show. It really will. And it's typical government, boom, let's go at it, like Hurricane Katrina, and then all of the backlash. They're talking about adding another tranche of money. They're talking about 200 million. But the fact of the matter is, I don't even think that that's enough, even if they get that through. Okay, so I think that our politicians are just arguing about what they normally do, and the conventional wisdom says that they will get something done, and there'll be another 200 million. But if you look at Beth is the name
200
of my
million
bank.
or 200 billion?
Billion, I'm sorry, 200 billion.
Yeah.
So if you listen to what Beth, my banker, said, that that 200 that she probably 10% or 15%, 10 to 15% of the people who applied at her bank got funded. That means that we need well over $1 trillion, close to $2 trillion to take care of this whole thing if everybody's going to get their money. She called it a lottery, and I said, excuse me, and she said, it absolutely is a lottery, and so you've got to be in there. And so, hopefully, if your application is in with your bank and it was accepted, but it wasn't accepted with SBA, hopefully you'll get funded. If you created an application with bad information, they have to come back to you, you may not get funded at all. Okay. By the way, if you've been told that you have an SBA number, then you will be funded. Your money has been appropriated. If you don't have an SBA number, then don't even bother right now. But a lot of banks are talking about keep applying, because when the next round comes, you'll be in a good position. Next slide.
So real quick, Dan,
Yeah.
this is kind of crazy when you think about it. So I'm sure there's some folks out there that don't have an SBA number. And so I think for them, I mean, I guess the recommendation is get in touch with their bank, make sure, I mean, because they were sole proprietors, right? There were folks who were delayed a week.
That whole group of people didn't even, they didn't even stand a chance.
That's crazy.
Well, it is crazy. And the banks, the banks are saying we're not accepting any more applications. My recommendation is to call your bank and say, listen, I want to submit an application right now, because if you haven't already done so. And I'm assuming that most people on the call, if you haven't been funded, at least you've filed the application. So somewhere you're somewhere in the process. And if they come up with another 200 billion, then hopefully you'll get some of that. But like the sole proprietors,
they should. I mean, we've been talking about this since the very first webinar, so I would assume everyone on the call is probably already, hopefully they've at least submitted, but
yep,
it's almost sad. I mean, I'm sure they're going to probably, I hope they put some more funding into it. So
they'll put more funding, but how much more can they put into it? See, what's going to happen is, in about 5 or 10 years, you're going to have tax, that your marginal tax rate is going to be like it was in the 70s, where you had 70%, 70% federal tax rate, and then you had another 15% for the state. People during the 70s were, at the highest levels, were paying 85 cents on the dollar into taxes, and you wonder why that was a lost decade for the economy, because all the money was going to taxes. You can't have, I think it's the Laffer curve, which says that you can't charge people more than 50%, because then the choice is, well, do I work and pay more than 50% to the government, or I don't work and just forget about it? Okay, so that's
it's funny, and just on the side here, years ago, when I was an aircraft mechanic, I used to work tons of overtime, and I figured it out even as a young man. I'm like, why am I working all this extra overtime? I'm not making a whole lot more money, because because when you get into overtime, the tax rate changes, right? Yep. And I was like, I'm not doing it anymore.
That's right. So
yep.
So we talked about obviously PPP, and then we talked about EIDL, which is the loan that you could get, and that the government says that they'll forgive $10,000 of it, and then the rest is basically based on your ability to borrow and what you need, and it could go out for 30 years. That program is, I haven't actually heard of anybody who's gotten that money yet, and we actually applied, so I would have thought that we could have. The deferral of employer Social Security taxes. So basically what you are doing is you're taking your payroll taxes, and then you're not paying them now, but you're paying them in 2021 and 2022, 50% each. It's a strategy. Again, I said it on the other calls. I don't recommend it, because when you mess with payroll taxes, if you can't pay it, you're going to get burned, and you're going to get burned big. There's
Amen, brother. I agree with that one.
And there's a bunch of, I subscribe to all these newsletters from accountants and lawyers and whatnot. And there's some folks that say that that it doesn't play nicely with the PPP. So basically, if you do this and you're accepted for PPP, you've got to stop deferring your taxes, or otherwise it'll eat into the amount of money that can get forgiven. So let's just assume that for now PPP is done. Hopefully by the end of the week or beginning of next week, it starts up again. EIDL, that keep applying for it. And then there's this other thing that called the Main Street Loan Program that a lot of folks are looking into, and people are saying, hey, Dan, am I eligible? It's basically for what they call mid-sized to large business. A mid-sized to large business is over 500 employees, okay? Now, the minimum borrowing is $1 million, and it's got to be paid over 4 years, and the interest rate floats. And so before this call, Donnie and I were just talking about that. Well, that sounds great, except for the fact that I just threw that number into my loan amortization at 7%, because it could go to 7%. You're going to be paying, that's going to be a $25,000 a month payment for 4 years. I'm not sure if anybody on this call really is interested in doing that, but it is something that you could look into. It's not really built for 500 or less employees, although you could technically do it. But again, your minimum borrowing is $1 million. So,
And just to clarify here real quick before we move on, let's just say I really need this CARES Act, the PPP money, and I did not make it for whatever reason. I didn't get an SBA number. Theoretically, I could apply for EIDL, and if the PPP comes through, then it kind of gets, they kind of shake that out at the end. Is that
10,000, that 10,000 of forgiveness of EIDL will come off of the money from PPP. Okay, so
right.
So that's
okay.
They work in conjunction with each other, but it's going to be really interesting come this summer. Let's say that we get back to some semblance of normalcy, and the government starts coming in and tries to figure out who, this thing is it's going to be with us for a long time, and it's going to be really ugly, and there's going to be a ton of corruption that's going to be shown, and it's going to be a normal let's go government type program. So
Dan, it's government. It's going to be clean and quick.
It's going to be clean, quick, and efficient.
That's right. Exactly right.
We're here to help. We're the government. So, So anyway, I think one of the things that we talked about is recovery. What does that look like? It's going to come in two prongs. We talked about that last time. When can I go out of my house, and then when does the economy recover? But I think Donnie kind of came up with something. It's if you remember like that big Hurricane Andrew in Florida, right? So if you're in the hurricane and you're in your house and you're worried that your house is going to cave in and it's going to kill you, that's the first thing, right? But once you survive that and the hurricane's over and it's sunny and beautiful, but all the houses are destroyed, is that what happens after we come out of our houses? Is that what happens? And if it is, you've got to prepare for it. If it's not, the stock market seems to think otherwise. The stock market is telling us that this is going to be a V shape and we're going to go right back to it. I'm not quite sure I understand how it gets to that. It could just be all of this government stimulus being put into the economy right now. And at some point, it's got to dry up. At some point, the government can't keep, printing money and giving it out. So,
well, the other thing too, Dan, is I've got to believe that as a result of this, a lot of businesses are going to change. I mean, they're going to adapt. They're going to oh, well, we can work from home. Oh, we can do meetings virtually. Oh, we can. I mean, I think business behavior is going to change, and so the rebound, it's going to rebound. But what is that really going to result in a lot more jobs? Is that going to put everyone back to work? I don't know. It's a great question.
This is kind of old news, but Amazon, it's kind of, well, you come home every day and it's like Christmas is a box there, right? But what this has proven is that most people are now using Amazon and Walmart online, and if you look at their stock prices, they're at record highs. We're talking before all this happened. It's never been higher because the stock market's realizing the big winners are Amazon and Walmart. And when they win, guess who loses? Small business, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting.
For sure. So now we're going to transition. I mean, thanks, Dan, by the way, for the financial update. I mean, that's wonderful. Hopefully, folks have or at least have an SBA number, and if they don't, they've got an alternative. But so now we're going to kind of switch over. We're going to swap the webinar, and I realize we are 10-minute. Well, we're going to probably go a little bit past 2, but we can. A lot of this stuff is pretty basic. But we're going to kind of talk through hey. What if COVID-19 returns? What if we kind of start going back to work and then all of a sudden we go back to another lockdown? I tell you, I feel really bad for these folks who are like, I don't know if you saw what happened in Louisiana, but they not only locked down, but then they had a bunch of tornadoes blow through. And so, long story short, I don't care if you're in business, you're going to have a crisis, right? I mean, it's going to happen. And so there's no point in like, running and pretending like there's not going to be. So we thought we'd spend kind of and finishing off the series on, okay, this is COVID-19. Everyone's kind of in the slot now. I think most folks have figured out their new normal. How do we prepare, number one, of coming out, but then number two, for the next crisis, so that, hopefully we face it better than, because I feel like as an industry, we got pretty lucky with this one, right? There could easily be some sort of crisis that we're not so lucky. And so what do we do? And so that's going to be kind of the change. And, I wanted to start with asking a couple critical questions, right? One is, what does recovery mean? But the second one is, and by the way, I just had to put this in. When I was in high school, Bill Clinton was running for president. This was a huge thing. It's all about the economy, right? Most folks think that recovery is, and we've already talked about this previously, it's going to be that when we're all go back to work. Well, not really, right? What recovery means for us, and I think is an industry, whether you're in lawn, pest, or some other home service, it's really about when does the economy come back? When does it come back, and what's the timing of that looks like? And so the second question is what if we do dip into a long depression, right? And what does that look like for our industry? And then the third is, how do I position my business now for either a second wave or, we know there's going to be another crisis. Just when is it going to happen, and how do I position for that?
I mean,
and then finally,
I think as far as, like the president said, hey, we got to open up, and I think everybody wants to open up. The problem is that until they get a vaccine or some sort of antidote to this thing, it's just going to keep coming back. And,
right.
The new normal, running around with masks, that's just not going to cut it. So that's when the thing is over. And so what do you do when these waves come, and they will, so.
I don't know about you, but I get completely freaked out when I go to the grocery store now. Like everyone's running around with masks and gloves, and it's kind of surreal. But
I was just at the post office with my mask, and I ran into this guy, and he goes, "Isn't this great? This is the only time that you could go into a bank with a mask on and ask for money." So
don't do that.
Right.
All right. And then, the last question that we want to kind of just run through here briefly is, how do I ensure that I'm positioned well, just in case this is like 2009, right, where the restart is pretty slow. And so, we're going to kind of run through 4 basic perspectives, right, as you're thinking about this as an owner or as a manager, right? Number one is, how do I strengthen my infrastructure? What do I do on the financial side? What kind of business strategy do I put in place? And then finally, what do I do with people? Because obviously we know that's one of the biggest, or the biggest driver of a service industry. And I put this asterisk here because, Dan, I don't know about you, but normally when I see basic stuff like this, I'm like, we're good, right? And then when I start digging, I'm like, well, maybe it wasn't as good as I thought we were, right? And just because simple, doesn't make it easy. And so some of these slides are going to seem to be pretty basic, but I will say it probably is worth your time just validating what you think. I don't know if you heard it.
Yeah, the one thing that I would tell you is we're in a very simple business. The business model is very simple. Somebody's got a problem, you go to their house or business, you take care of it, you sign them up on contract, put them on a route, and you're done. It's not an easy to execute business. It's very difficult.
Right.
A lot of moving parts, and this is
sure.
But the model is very simple, so.
Yeah. So let's start with infrastructure. If you're not doing this, and I think a lot of folks already are, but if you're not, the very first capability you really need to be thinking about is, how do I operate in a distributed environment with 0 impact on operations? And that would be both your office, anything that's happening on the corporate and office side, as well as what's happening in the field. And so opportunities there are going to be your phone
just real
system.
quickly, what distributed? Some people are at home, some people are in the office, some people are in the field, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yep. It's essentially people are wherever they need to be. And, in terms of facing your customers, no one knows that there's any impact whatsoever. You're still taking calls, you're still selling, you're still running your business day to day, right? That's the very first capability. If I were, sitting back and say, well, hey, how do I crisis proof my business? Well, I've got to be able to do business anywhere, right? And that capability exists. And so the very first thing I would be looking at is my office, right? that's the most obvious. I know there's some folks who are still running offices, they're practicing social distancing. But if you have software or things that require you to be in the office, I would say those are pretty easy targets to be looking at. And so I'd be looking at my phone system. How do I manage my call center? Any checklists and procedures, can I run those remotely? How do I do that? And then of course, just moving the software, any software that you have that requires you to be in the office, getting it out in the cloud. On the field
By the
side,
way, on the software side, so most people are running cloud-based
yeah,
routing software. But if you're not on QuickBooks Online, if you're on the desktop version, this is the reason you go onto QuickBooks Online, because
yeah.
that's in the cloud and you can operate from anywhere.
Absolutely. So that's kind of the office side. On the field side, it's remote start, meaning like, your technicians are starting from home. Remote management, you're able to keep everyone where they need to be. And then remote procedures, right? Being able to validate that what you are delivering on the doorstep really is what's happening over time. And so, infrastructure recommendations, I'm a big fan of CTM. I think folks know that. I run I have a product that's integrated with it. We run it at Triangle. We've been very happy with that system. It's a VoIP system. It's not perfect, of course. Any office software, again, these are basic things. I just want to reiterate that if you're not doing this, now's the time. And then the last one, which is Slack, which I think has been kind of a game changer for us, being able to communicate real time with your office and your techs, and then being able to do it together. Slack is a great platform to do that. Again, these are recommendations. You don't have to use these. These are the ones that I'm familiar with. There may be ones that are better, but these are all apps that we use. I don't use Microsoft, but all the other ones up there I do. But I know Dan uses 365 and is very happy with it. It has pretty much the same capability. The second thing is, okay, so you focus on getting the capability to work in a distributed environment. The second thing is, and we do this in the military a lot, is that you exercise the process, right? It's easy to kind of put that in. It's like, oh, we got the capability now, right? It's something totally different to actually exercise the process. I think one of the benefits from this exercise, I know it's been a benefit for Triangle, is that we have validated and made our systems way better as a result of this, as far as remote management. We're going to run our call center from folks' homes. It's been an excellent way for us to make sure that what we're doing out in the cloud actually works. I just don't know that I would wait till the final exam to make sure that that's all working. Meaning the crisis comes, then you try to figure out, oh, this is how we do this, right? So what I would say for that is, consider work from home for days, and I would say that for your technicians, I would say that for your office staff. And then, maybe even if you want to go to the extreme, is take, a day or 2 days and say, okay, guys, we're gonna exercise this. We're gonna route all the calls from home. Everyone's gonna be working from home. I don't know that I would do this in May or June. I would save this for the off season, right? But the point is that you've validated that what you have works and that you can flip a switch at any point and it's no problem, right? You can operate with the crisis. And so I think it really is important that you validate before the crisis. Flipping on now to, we talked about infrastructure. I think we've covered that fairly well. Now the next thing is financial. And Dan, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about this, but I think, creating a large cushion is a lot more than just having cash. And so you want to kind of talk about this a little bit?
Sure. So everybody who received funding is high-fiving each other, right? So what a windfall. Except for if this thing goes on for months and months, you may need that money. Okay. So because I believe that this thing was put together so hastily and that there's going to be a lot of fallout from it, especially in the way that you prove that that you've met the criteria for forgiveness. They're not telling you to do this, but I recommend highly that if you've been funded, open up a separate account, put the money in the separate account. When you draw payroll, make sure you draw the payroll from that account. Make sure that you draw if you're paying your utilities or your rent or interest payments, make it come from that account so that you can actually show where that money went. Now, if that's true and everything's going great, that means that you're going to have a whole bunch of money over here that you didn't have to spend on payroll, rent. And I recommend that you put that money aside and don't do anything with it for a while. Just because this thing It's funny. I heard somebody on TV, I think it was CNBC, talk about how this virus has beat us at every corner. Every time we think that we know something, it shows that we were wrong and something else happens. And while we're saying, okay, we're good, we're over we reached the apex and we're on the way down, and I hope that happens. What if it doesn't? And if you have that money, put it aside and make sure cash is king. So push some of your money into savings. Try to work with your banks to increase your credit lines. You may not have to draw them, but they're nice to have, okay? And I'm going to tell you right now that interest rates are going lower, but this happened in 2007 and 2008. Interest rates went really low, except nobody was qualifying for loans because you had to have stellar credit. Go see right now if you qualify for anything, what you qualify. See if you can get increases in your lines of credit.
Yeah.
Next slide.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the cushion is not only cash, it's also the cushion of being able to roll into credit if you needed it to. And I mean, it could almost double your cushion, right? And so great point there. I agree with that 100%. All right, next one.
Tighten up your accounting. Make sure that your collection policies are in that you're doing a good job with that. Make sure that those who are charging credit cards, you're probably going to see a lot more credit card failures. So as soon as you run your credit cards, make sure that you get those failures so that you're on top of it. And reconciliations. So your bank reconciliations, if you're a PCO Bookkeepers client, we do your reconciliations, but in QuickBooks, you can get that download every day, that feed, and make sure that that you can reconcile from cash to book and from book to or from the bank to the book and vice versa. Okay, so make sure that your reconciliations are getting.
I was gonna say, that's just making sure that you got good data, because the last thing you want to do is realize that you don't, and then all of a sudden, let's just say something dries up and now you're out of options. Not a good spot to be in.
So anyway, next. Renegotiate terms with vendors, except for your accountants and your
marketing firm.
And your marketing firm.
If you're with Coalmarch, other folks, absolutely, go right ahead.
So if you can't get a discount, get longer terms. If you can't get longer terms, get whatever you can. I had one friend of mine said, I'm getting a T-shirt if I can. So that's what you get. So next slide.
There you go. Well, just getting back to this, number one is know what's really happening, right? Create your large cushion, know what's happening, and then create time, right? All of these things are just going to put you in a super good spot if something goes down, right? All right, and next thing.
Some of the things, make sure that you have KPIs on everything, key performance indicators. We talked about cost per lead, cost per sale. We want to know about our labor percentage, what we're spending on the various items. If there's an area that you're not an expert in, you can outsource it. A quick commercial, PCO Bookkeepers, we're happy to do your accounting and bookkeeping. That was kind of selfless, but had to throw it in there. But outsource, if there's not a strong process in place, outsource. And every position has KPIs, just make sure that you measure them, communicate with them, incentivize people on on making these numbers. Usually we talk about, well, only my salespeople are incentivized or my managers. No, make everybody part of the program, that everybody can win.
Well, Dan, we say this all the time, but in the service industry, your payroll is your number one expense and also your number one capability. And so you can never get off of that, and you just need to stay on top of it. Any service business needs to make sure they do that. So great advice there.
Yep.
So I think now we're going to transition over to business strategies. And again, these are all basic, right? But I want to just quickly run through these. And we've kind of already talked about this, but number one is get your KPIs in place and make sure that they're accurate so that you can make decisions early, right? This is a dashboard that we use at Coalmarch. Again, not trying to advertise for Coalmarch at all. I'm just making the point that this is the kind of data that you should be looking at on a daily basis, especially in this environment, right? Just because, something could easily change in your market, something could easily change with the economy, And when you've got real-time data at your fingertips, it allows you to make decisions quick and early and not waste time or money. Second thing is get your processes in place that scale and allow you to play effective offense, right? So daily productivity goals with accountability. Again, you're assuming that you're running all of these things remotely. Like you may not even see a technician. I know for us, I don't think we see our tech. I mean, a lot of our technicians have not physically been around, the branch manager since this whole thing is kicked off. And so you just want to make sure that your systems are in place where you can still have goals and accountability. And even though you may not be face to face, that you're still doing that. And this is just an example.
Yeah, one thing going back to that is production. Make sure that you're coming back with what you sent out. So if you send out $1,000 worth of work, which is 10 stops, make sure that that they've done the 10 stops. Obviously you're going to have some skips, but it's really important that you hold people accountable. That if sales dries up and marketing dries up, remember we're in a recurring revenue business. That could dry up, but that will take longer to dry up than your sales and marketing. So you've got to make sure that your routes are tight, efficient, and the completions that your skips and cancels are to a minimum.
100% agree with that. And this is just an example. We can keep a copy of this in the resources that we talk about at the end, but this is just making sure that you are able to manage all of that remotely. Third thing is create processes from your sales teams, for your sales teams from home, meaning that they can sell from home. You can route inbound calls, you can use outbound auto dialers, folks can use that from home. And then you develop the checklist and accountability to manage that remotely. And again, this is just another example of us doing this remotely. Again, right now, Triangle's call center, I'm sure a lot of folks that are on the call, their call centers are all running from home right now. Just making sure that you double check that, number one, you have the capability, but number two, there's one thing to have the technology. There's something totally different to have the people systems that allow you to do this remotely. And so just verifying that what you've got actually works. And then this one is a really important one. I think if you take nothing else from kind of this, how do I make sure that I play, or how do I get ready for the next crisis? It's probably this point here, and that is put processes in place that scale and allow you to play effective defense. And what I mean by that is aggressive cancellation management. Don't just say, yep, okay, yeah, we can, yep, we'll go ahead and cancel you, Ms. Smith, or whatever. Really pay attention to that and get everyone dialed into it. This is a spreadsheet that I'd love to tell you it was my thought. It wasn't. It was actually my team's creation. And we actually go through every single cancel and grade it and learn from it, and we talk about it. And this is reviewed every single night. And so the whole point of it is that right now, really pay attention to what's happening with your cancels and make this a priority. It goes back to what I said on the previous webinar, which is, one growth strategy is don't lose accounts, right? And it's probably one of the biggest ones because it's the cheapest. And so the takeaway from this is that, hey, you don't have to do it the way we do it, but the point of it is that you've got to be on top of this and make sure that you're not taking anything for granted, especially with cancels, and that you keep a really strong pulse on what's happening there. And then the next thing is to have credit policies that are solid. Now, Dan, you talked about this before, but the main thing is to understand, like, hey, this is how far we're going to go. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. You have a quarterly service, they don't pay, or they their credit card is rejected. Are you going to do that second service? Well, in normal times, you might not, right? So maybe now you might grant one more service, but after that, you don't want it. Remember, it costs you money every time you go out to somebody's house or place of business. And so, you want to make sure that you're getting paid for it. So credit policies are extremely important, especially in rough times. I'd love to say that, you're the cable company, so either you go with us or it's nobody else. The fact is, if you get too harsh on your credit terms, there's other pest control and lawn care companies out there to go to. So it's a bit of a tightrope that you need to walk, and make sure that that you do it properly. You got to be firm, but you've got to show value, and hopefully push people away.
Dan, I had a really great question from a client, and he was asking about this very point. He's like, hey, what should we do free services if someone wants to cancel and we leave them on? Should we go out and do a service for free as kind of goodwill? You know, and I told him, like, I would not do free services. I would gladly pause your service, right? Because who's to say that you don't go out and do 1, 2, 3 free services and they're like, I'm not starting back, right?
Well,
And
the
that's
other
much more
thing is,
expensive versus this
yeah,
pausing, right?
the other thing is you're training your customers to wait for a sale, or, one of the things
Right,
about the lawn care industry, which, I love the lawn care industry, but it drives me crazy, is that what we do is that we let people cancel, and then we go back as a marketing, um, you know, uh, um, we tag them as canceled sales, so we give them something for nothing. Now, if you call them and you say that, hey, if you come back, we'll give you a free service. Well, what are you training them to do next year? I mean, it's
right,
just,
right.
you're training them to, the airlines do the same thing, right? You wait for a sale, it's coming, right? But the answer is, I don't know that I would start just giving things away.
No,
Trent made a good, like last week. If you've got somebody who's really in dire straits, and it's a charitable type thing, that's fine. But I don't think that I would just give people free service.
right. I certainly wouldn't make it a policy,
Yeah.
100%. I would much rather pause versus going to give out free service. So I
Yep.
wouldn't want to devalue it.
Yep.
Okay, and then the final thing is going to be people strategies, and I'm going to blow through this fairly quickly, but we've already talked about this. Is number one is, no lax in accountability when you're working in a distributed environment. Make sure that you got checklists that can be managed remotely. Dan, you want to talk about the OSHA side of
Yeah.
this
So,
thing? And
one of the things that I said before, I get all these newsletters from law firms and accounting firms, and I look at them. A lot of the lawyers, what they're talking about is that there's going to be new policies. As a matter of fact, we're working on an M&A deal right now where I got the purchase agreement, and there's a whole section in it about COVID-19 and about how you are making representations that you're in compliance with COVID-19 protocol and whatnot. And my question is, what is COVID-19 protocol? What was it yesterday? What's it today? And what's it, right? So for those of you who think that OSHA is a real pain in the neck because they come in and whatnot, there's going to be a whole level of safety compliance that you need to do around this whole thing, and be ready because it's coming, and the problem is it's changing so quickly that what's right today might not be right tomorrow, and vice versa. So
and then kind of the final point on the people side is that, I don't think it's any secret that, we've had a record pace of unemployment filings. And so, the reality of that is that it's actually kind of a positive for our industry. And what I mean by that is that, there are people out there now who typically would not give our industry or industries the time of day. Probably looks pretty great right now. And so, I would be, if it were me, I'd be taking a good look at my staff and looking at it and saying, hey, are there folks out there that are giving me problems? Are there folks out there not producing? Is this, there are folks on my staff that's not a good fit? There's no better time than the present right now to consider either an upgrade or to be adding. And so that's
I,
just
I
kind of a general takeaway from that. But
I think one of the best things that's going to come out of this is, you're going to have some slow times, and you make that cross a burden, pros and cons of keeping somebody or how good they are. And if you have marginal players, you're going to be able to replace them with much better players, because this whole unemployment thing is definitely, it's funny how the stock market's not factoring it in, but you're going to have 20% unemployment for a while there, and I don't know when it's going to come back. I'm sure that it's not going to stay up that high. It'll come down, but still, even 10%, that's pretty high.
a lot
I have
higher
a
than it's been,
question.
for sure.
Yeah, go
I have a
ahead.
question for you guys on the personnel side. What happens if you have A players or people that you want to keep that all of a sudden don't want things to go back to the way they were? They want to keep working from home. They don't want their commute. You've proven that you can do it. How would you handle that, or what type of policies should people be thinking about for that moving forward?
Well, if they're a true A player, they're pretty much going to get whatever they want out of me, at least, because if they're really true A players, I mean, I shouldn't say they're going to get whatever they want, but I will say this. It is definitely going to be a new landscape, right? And I personally have always been kind of this like work from home, blah, whatever. I've become a big fan of it as of late. I mean, me personally, I'm probably working more now than I ever worked. I was actually going to work, and so, and we're still executing, we're still getting things done, and so I know for me, like, hey, I think I'm going to be a lot more flexible now. I don't know that I would be like, okay, you're home all the time and never come into the office. I think there's a lot of benefit of getting together and having that connection, even though we can't do it right now. But for me, I'm going to have a lot more flexibility. What about you, Dan?
Well, we've been, our client managers, we are able to attract, some of our best client managers are CPAs who are moms who they can't work on a normal schedule. So they work from home, and you'll get emails from our client managers at 2 in the morning from, those that are staying home. And so if I can be flexible in my in what I can offer, then I can get a better quality of person. Other accounting firms might not be interested in hiring them because they want them to show up someplace. We've been doing this, this distributed workforce since the beginning, since we've always had the phone system. We've had all of our tax software is in the cloud. So when it snows during the winter, everybody's from home, and we don't lose a trick. So I don't think that is an issue. The question is, what are some of the other things that are changing? And if they're demanding those things, it's a case by case thing. But in general, I think you've got to create rules and manage exceptions. Don't create a rule for every exception.
Sure. So do you want to finish this out here, Dan, by talking
Sure.
about M&A and kind of what's happening with that?
So M&A is, I don't want to say that it's dead. There are still people buying out there. There are definitely some vulture investors who are looking for great deals. And, my recommendation is, if you've got a good company, don't succumb to that. There'll be better days. But there are definitely, the big international firms have pretty much dried up in terms of what they're doing. There are some private equity firms that are out there buying. So if you're interested, give us a ring. We can let you know what we think. It's not going to be the crazy multiples that you were seeing for the very best companies, which most people didn't see anyway. People are talking north of 3 times revenue. That was for very, very few folks. But you could get the ones that were kind of in the normal slot. Those values haven't come down, and so you should be able to get a reasonable deal. The big question is, people are buying an asset, and that asset is a series of customer relationships. And if your attrition seems to tick up because of this, then that asset becomes worth less money. So you're, folks who are buying are putting in tighter attrition clauses and things like that. If you're interested in getting out, we're happy to look at it, and I think that it's a good time. But I think you're going to have some better times come fall. By the way, I think if you want to get out in the fall, we should be working on it right now. So definitely give us a call and we can help you with that.
And Dan, I think with that, we are coming to the end. Just a real quick public service announcement. So all of these videos from this webinar series, which, by the way, Risa and Dan, thank you guys. I have very much enjoyed doing these webinars, and I just want to thank the Coalmarch team as well as folks from PCO, their team as well, for putting us together. It's just been phenomenal doing it.
Terrific.
A ton of fun
Thanks
doing
so much.
Yeah.
I don't think when we decided to do this that we could have ever dreamed of the amount of people who have signed up. It was funny. I got the obviously 100% of the people who sign up don't show up at the at the webinar, but I got a text from Donnie last night. It just said boom, and I looked in the in our signups, and we had over 1,000 people sign up for today's webinar.
Yeah,
We
it's
could
crazy.
never imagine that we were going to get this kind of response.
No, so I hope to our audience this has been helpful for you. We obviously, that was the goal, was to just give folks a heads up of kind of what we're seeing, hopefully offer value, hopefully make it easier for you to do business. And with that, we're going to kind of close off this webinar series, and just want to make an announcement that We have a YouTube channel now, and we're going to be pushing up some content and questions that came out of this webinar. I think Dan's going to be putting some things up as well. And
we actually have a Vimeo channel, which will be moving to YouTube, but I probably have about 25 videos on there. If you want information on break-even analysis, on collections, on accrual to cash, on taxes and things like that, it's PCO Bookkeepers, and it's on Vimeo, which is
nice.
you know, a place to house them. So
sure. And just also a reminder that if you want to look at any of the resources and these things that we talked about in these webinar series, you can go to coalmarch.com/COVID-19, look at all the templates and resources from there. Of course, me and Dan are both authors. Again, I don't run around making signing autographs, but Dan's book is good.
I do.
I'm not going to talk about my
A lot of people have asked.
Yeah, I don't get those. But you know, if you want to learn more about business, learn more about marketing, about building your company, and as well as, I mean, Dan's book is great as well. And just by the way, his books and his sales goes to a charity, which is wonderful. And with that, you know, here's our contact info. If there's anything that we can do, either on the marketing side or on the accounting side, we would love to help. And with that, I think we're going to sign off. And so again, thanks everyone. Thanks Dan. Thanks Marisa.
Thanks so much.
Coalmarch
Enjoyed
team.
it. Appreciate everybody's help. Appreciate everybody coming.
And we're going to do the
Thanks so
outtakes now. So Laura, you can try to close us out, and I think we're done.